I'm Kurt Waldrop, and this is Radical Freedom. When the people of the British colonies in America started to become more annoyed with the laws and taxes of the British Crown, it became common for leaflets to be printed to explain exactly what was going on and why people should be annoyed about it. Those who printed such tracts were arrested if found and charged with sedition, sometimes even treason against the Crown. If a newspaper was so bold as to be critical of the British government, the paper could be shut down, all property seized by British forces. When the U.S. Constitution was being written, it was demanded by many that a Bill of Rights be included in order for them to vote to ratify this thing. After ratification, 12 amendments were written down and 10 of these were passed. Now, these amendments were not granted us by a benevolent government. Instead, these are rights that were considered already ours and bestowed by God or nature or both. And the amendments were not to grant these rights, but to protect them from the government. The very first amendment includes freedom of the press. Now, it was considered essential in a free society for the press to be able to criticize the government in all of its forms. But who were the press? Might be an established newspaper at the time with a printing press and a distribution of thousands. Or it might be a single individual with a quill pen that could write a grievance, could criticize something, he could post it in the town square. Whatever form it took, its purpose was to be a watchdog on those in power, to help stop tyranny and root out corruption. It allowed the people to get a look behind the curtains of power, and it kept corruption to a minimum, as there was always someone to point it out. Fast forward to today. The press, more often than not, is actually broadcast news on TV or radio, internet sources, sometimes it's even individual blogs. The founders had no way of knowing that this would happen, but it completely fits with the intent of what the amendment was for perfectly. That is, to keep eyes on those in power, except in many cases it doesn't. Have you noticed that about 93%, that's the actual number by the way, of what are called mainstream media, that's newspapers, big-time blogs on the internet, network television, heavily biased towards the left. This is a danger to our American way of life, as the left tends to see the Constitution more as something to overcome, rather than a limitation on the natural inclination towards tyranny within the government. Both Washington Post and the New York Times, now, and neither one of these are exactly what you'd call right-leaning, would agree that far more in journalism are liberal Democrats. The Washington Post estimates that only about 7% of journalists are conservatives. But CNN still remains the most trusted voice in news, and it remains the choice to show at every single airport and bus station and most places that serve food that decide they're going to show us the news. Oh yes, there is Fox. You know, the horrible, evil, right-leaning Fox! Except the news department of Fox doesn't actually lean to the right based on analyzing how they handle stories. They actually really are the most balanced network when it comes to reporting. Along with this cacophony of left-wing propaganda disguised as news, whose purpose is to either cheer on a particular agenda or to discredit the right, comes the incessant left-wing noise generated by most network television programming and Hollywood movies. It's amazing to me sometimes that any Americans remain conservative at all. So why does this happen? Well, there are several factors at work that pull news to the left. First is the indoctrination mills that universities today have become. Most would-be journalists go off to school not wanting to report facts, but instead they want to change the world. They're subjected to left-wing professors for about 4 years or sometimes more. Then they get jobs in news departments run by, you guessed it, left-wing liberals. A similar scenario applies for producers and directors of movies and television. And sad to say, most actors are on the left. Well, quite frankly, because of the reason that they're actors in the first place. They dream of a job where all they have to do is learn to say some lines, pretend to be someone they're not. The women on the left tend to like the idea of government taking care of them. And the spineless men will, well, frankly, they'll say whatever they need to say and become whatever they need to become in order to get the woman's attention and so on. So, what are some examples of this bias? Am I just making this up, or can I show some concrete examples? One small thing that is often done is subtle differences between reporting when a politician is accused of a crime. For example, the New York Times failed to mention that Congressman Bob Menendez is a Democrat in a story about his trial for corruption. Usually Democrats accused of something have their party affiliation left until the very end of the article or omitted entirely, while the Republicans, well, when the Republicans are accused, usually they have their party posted in the very first line of the article. Joe Blow, Republican from Iowa. That's just how it works. Oh, you need more? When Obama opened the American Embassy in Havana, Cuba, the most common word that the media used to describe this event was historic. I found multiple clips where reporters were saying, it's historic, this historic event, the historic day in Havana, it's historic. While when Trump opened the embassy in Jerusalem, the most common word used was controversial. Oh yes, this horrible controversial moment. The mainstream media reported the very sickly Obama economy as if it were a freight train, just growing and growing, while the more or less ignores the success of the Trump economy. Since the Trump inauguration, economic growth has been up, unemployment has reached a 16-year low, and the 31% growth of the stock market in Trump's first year was the best it had been under a president since FDR. I think we can be pretty confident that all of this will be ignored as much as possible by our friendly neighborhood mainstream media. When Obama traded 5 Taliban fighters for the army deserter Bo Bergdahl in 2014, Obama was hailed by the press as a hero, getting our poor soldier back home, but omitting most of the details of his desertion as well as the soldiers that died or were wounded in the search for him. However, when 3 Americans were released from North Korean captivity due to negotiations by the Trump administration, rather than praising Trump, well, they guessed at his political motivations. How he met the former hostages at the airport and actually acted like he cared. Yeah, we can't have that from Trump. Obviously, it's all made up. While the media would throw Obama softball questions, those same reporters ignore Trump's accomplishments and focus instead on Russian collusion stories that even extreme libs like Dianne Feinstein admit they have no evidence for. They're also pushing this Russian dossier story, but as more information keeps coming out showing it to be fiction that was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign, the story is slowly being allowed to die, but oddly enough, they're not making any retractions about it. The other big story for the mainstream media, well, is a porn star that claims that she signed a non-disclosure agreement with Trump to not mention that she had sex with him. Well, if true, it would seem that she would be in more trouble than Trump since she's the one who broke a legal contract. Also, if this is true, and that is a big if, this all supposedly happened about 10 years before Trump even decided to run. Now, the media also works hard to show Republicans as racist, bigot, homophobe, misogynist every single chance they get. And sure, there are people like that in both parties, but how is it reported? Comments made by Republicans are often twisted so they seem racist, and it becomes a major news story. An example of that is happening right now, and it perfectly illustrates my point. During a roundtable addressing California's sanctuary city policies at the White House on May 16th, Fresno County Sheriff Margaret Mims said that there could be an MS-13 gang member that I know about, but if they don't reach a certain threshold, I cannot tell ICE about them. Trump responded, well, You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't even people, these are animals. And we're taking them out of the country at a level and a rate that has never happened before. And Fox News reported that immediately, several media outlets, including, you've heard these names already, ABC News, the New York Times, NBC News, the Associated Press, CBS News, CNN, and even C-SPAN, the network for when you have insomnia, took the president's comments out of context, making it seem as though he was referring to illegal aliens in general. And even the left-leaning anti-gun Piers Morgan tweeted that this statement was taken completely out of context. So, yet another example of the mainstream media's war against conservative America. When Democrat operatives such as Rebecca Christopher referred to their courtship of Hispanic voters by the Democrat Party as Taco Bowl outreach, or when Congressman Hank Johnson, a Democrat from Georgia, compared Israeli settlers on the West Bank to termites, yeah, a little anti-Semitic there, it's totally ignored by the mainstream media. While the media is focused on the possibility that Trump used the Russians to help steal an election, it's completely ignored that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the chairwoman of the Democrat Party, actually helped Hillary steal the Democrat nomination from Bernie Sanders. Whether the issue was Hurricane Katrina, the Clintons, Israel, firearms, global warming, you can always depend on a left-wing spin on 95% of the stories out there. So the moral is, just know when you see a story that doesn't sound right in the media, there's a very good chance that, well, it isn't. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you go below, give me a thumbs up, please subscribe if you enjoy my videos, and please go to Amazon and get a copy of my book, Radical Freedom. Until next time, this is Kurt Waldrop. Stay free, my friends. Bye.